Started here. I feel like I've got a bunch of hungry people sitting out there. Right. Well, there's no food in here, so sorry about that. I have some gum.
What flavor?
I don't know. Blue. Yeah. So, right, free and blue. So who's downloading Mountain Lion right now? I was trying. Yeah, it's a little slow. Last year during BriForum, Lion also came out, and so we had the same problem, and we had to actually call and make sure that the McCormick Place IT staff was throttling the internet for everybody so that we could make sure the presenters had enough bandwidth available. But man, I think they have so much here that it might not matter. So I paused it for this, but thankfully I don't need internet. So this session here today is doing it without VDI, and the idea behind it is, it actually was sparked after a conversation I had with Winova, and I realized that, holy cow, these guys do a whole bunch of different things that all enable you to do VDI-like things without doing VDI. And so I started to think of the other ways that we could get VDI features and satisfy some of the goals of desktop virtualization without actually deploying a VDI-based solution. I'm not going to dig deep into how these things work, but it's just more of a kind of a reality check, right? That you don't have to fall for some of the hype that you get all the security or you get all these different user management features and that kind of a thing just with Zen Desktop or View or vWorkspace or whatever that's called now. There's other ways as well. So first off, if you don't know me, I'm Gabe. I live in Omaha, which if you've never been there, you've probably seen it like this. That's pretty much how everybody goes. It might even be an actual shot of Omaha, but it looks like there's too many mountains. This is, I think, my 14th or 15th year doing IT, and almost all but one of those is spent doing desktop management of some sort, maybe a dozen of which has been something along the lines of desktop virtualization. To give you an idea, you guys remember this picture? It's Microsoft in 1978, and I think the tagline that went around in the email was like, would you invest in these guys? Well, one year, the perfect storm happened for us. I think it was 1999. I was sitting at the same consulting job that I had with Brian in Cleveland, Ohio. We had an intern with us that sort of knew Photoshop, like 2. And we had like a $1,500 brand new digital camera and a day without any billable time. And so we took and added this. There's Brian, circa 99 or 2000. Here's the intern that did it. And this skinny, hairy guy right here is me. So this is, I think this was 2000, like a month before this company went bankrupt, presumably because we didn't have any billable time. So, maybe you can just say we've been doing it since 1978. So write for brianmadden.com, consumerizeit.com, and occasionally we have more time to write, and so we do books and stuff. There's a few of these things floating around. If you want one, you can come find us. We have a lot. So they make you order so many before it becomes cost effective. So today, though, what I want to talk about here, I want to set it up a little bit. Why are we here? Why are we trying to have this discussion? Really, it's all about desktop management, but we'll talk about that a little bit. What can we do about it? And then who does this? And so, and that one's kind of the more fun one because we get to talk about some of the solutions that are out there. But let's jump right in and do why are we here? So as that photo goes back to 99, 2000, somewhere in there, we can take our story back to 2001, which is when Windows XP came out. And if you think about that, that's 11 years. And I remember running Windows Whistler on like Cyrix 300 megahertz computer hooked up to my TV, playing Monkey Island, and thinking it was so badass. And it had to have been in 2000. So 12 years, I guess you could say, that we've been dealing with Windows XP. Holy cow. It doesn't matter how old you are, Windows XP has been around for the bulk of your IT desktop management career. Dating back all the way. It's been, I don't know, it's our old friend, right? We know it inside and out. And so we know this so well, right? We know the drill. We've gone through this whole cycle 4 or 5 times. If you have a 3-year refresh cycle and you've been doing Windows XP for 11 years, you've gone through this assess, design, deploy, maintain, recycle, or retire cycle 4 times, which is crazy to think about that. But so we get stuck in our ways pretty easily now, and we just think, all right, what the hell, we'll just keep on doing this. Because this, and I'm sure if you've been here before, you've seen Brian with this slide, this is how we do PCs. We just call up Dell and order a pallet full of their second cheapest machines, because nobody wants to be the guy that orders the cheap ones. And then this is how we do it. We ghost them, we use Altiris, we do whatever. We know this. We probably even know our XP key by heart. Does anybody actually know that by heart? I did at one point, and I'm not ashamed to admit it. Nobody, man. All right. I don't remember it now, just to be quite honest. I remember my Windows 2000 key had HD2VM in it, but that's all I remember. So Windows XP has to change finally, right? And so with that, Microsoft gives us Vista. And we... I wish I could get this whole picture on there, because there's a whole train behind that that's off the screen. And I wish I was there when that happened. Away, but there. So we just went back to doing Windows XP. I mean, did anybody deploy Vista en masse in their organization? Really? At scale? 45,000. Holy shit, 45,000. And then 15 days later, all of them booted. Well, most people went back, most people just installed onto their desktop, said, this sucks, and then went back to Windows XP. And, they just kept doing that. And so who still has Windows XP in their organization? Oh my gosh, it's so many. So, what's that?
We still have 2600 Vista.
Oh my gosh, you still have 2600 Windows Vista or desktops out there too.
Business.
Running. Wow, running. I applaud you. That's tenacity right there, sticking to it. So Windows 7 comes along, and we think, holy cow, this is awesome. It's not Vista. That has that going for it. It's faster, it's sleeker, it's more secure, it's got new enhancements. It's everything we wanted Vista to be, but it wasn't. The problem is that since we completely ignored Vista for the most part, we didn't really learn about all those new changes that came along. Things like profiles, the profile changes, and application compatibility changes. And now, also along the timeline there, now we've got 64-bit applications that we have to worry about too. IE6, we just kept using XP, so we just kept using our old IE applications that worked in IE6, no problem. So we skipped it with Vista, 7 comes along, and we have to learn that too, or at least we have to learn that that's a problem. Things like the hardware compatibility list has changed, UAC, all of these things are relatively new to us. And then at the same time, there's people like me and people like Brian and people like all the marketers for the VDI companies that are saying, wait, we can use VDI for all of this stuff. And I mean, it promises security and manageability and agility, availability, all these ilities, right? Migration and faster installs, moves, adds, and changes, right? So now we've got all those things we have to relearn, and we got all these cool things about VDI, and so we're excited about Windows 7, and it's all going to save us money. And then we realized that to get all this stuff and to relearn all of that other stuff is kind of hard. And the reason for that is that, I think this is in every single deck I've ever made, that desktop virtualization is not equal to server virtualization. Because this scientific slide from Sean Bass shows that desktop virtualization is much harder than servers because servers are short and green and desktops are long and red. So presentation over. The servers are predictable, right? It was really easy and an easy sell to say, look, dude, you can go from this to this. And there wasn't a CTO or CIO in the world that wouldn't say, okay, sign me up. But if servers are predictable, because they beg to be standardized, right? They do the same things day in and day out. We can watch them, monitor them, get a baseline, and then we can really accurately scale those things out and deploy it across the board relatively simply. Desktops, on the other hand, are completely random. They're users are completely random. Their I/O is random. Their usage patterns are random. I love the hot dog one. Their usage patterns vary so widely. One user does nothing all day and another user does something all day. Or one user sends out this cute YouTube video of a kitty wiping its eyes, and then everybody wants to view that at the same time, and that can really skew your resource utilization patterns. And so desktops are not the same as servers when it comes to scaling these things out. And so where server virtualization was a relatively simple concept that obviously there were different applications that required some extra consideration. We still had to learn storage in a virtualization capacity. Desktops in the data center virtualized changes all of that. And so while it looks like it's easy, we realize really quick that it's actually pretty hard and that desktops do not beg to be standardized. The application compatibility, 3D support, sysprep, user data disk, link clones, disk streaming, boot storms, login storms, hell, there's AV storms. All of these things are things that we never had to worry about with servers that we have to worry about with desktops. I mean, maybe a few of those, but not to the scale that we have to worry about them with desktops. So desktops are red and servers are green. Frankly, if all we needed in the world was Office and Windows, we could do that. That would be super easy, and we probably wouldn't need to have conferences to talk about it because, you know, there'd be one website: install Windows, install Office, go home. So we don't, right? We've got management issues and rights and storage and remote access and hot desking and branch offices and all these other applications that we need to do our job. And we have to manage all this stuff because there's thousands and thousands of these things out there, and we have to manage the desktops that go along with it. And so desktop virtualization as a whole, but VDI specifically, is really a selection of goals. And so that's why we try to pick which ones of these we can do. And this is in general what people are trying to do with desktop virtualization. And since VDI is the most recent advancement in desktop virtualization, this is essentially what we're trying to do with VDI. Now, a few of these are client hypervisor maybe more appropriate, or terminal server more appropriate, and things like that. But this is what VDI tries to solve. And so this session today is about trying to strike that balance here between VDI and this. Because VDI may not be appropriate. VDI is difficult. VDI is hard as hell to do, especially if you're starting from scratch now and trying to relearn all sorts of other new features of operating systems, like Windows 8. Does anybody have any actual plans to roll out Windows 8 like at launch? Are we waiting to see if there's, was it the Star Trek movies that was every other one was good? I think it was that. But so are we waiting to see if it's another Vista, or are we just waiting to see if, like, screw it. Next step is to the cloud? Yeah, nobody has ever raised their hand when I asked if they had Windows 8 plans right away. You're all probably going to install it as soon as you can, right? Like the RTM version, but other than that. So we're looking for there. We're looking for that happy place in the middle. The next part is, so what exactly can we do to satisfy those goals without doing VDI, whole hog, committing to that? And if we look at those goals, there's so many other things that we can do just in the general realm of desktop virtualization that can satisfy these things besides just VDI. And so if we drop that out, we still have these big concepts out there like terminal services and user environment management and client virtual machines and application streaming, right? We've got things like application virtualization. And we're going to breeze. Some of these are so obvious that they're painful, and we'll just breeze right through them, but they're there for completeness. But application virtualization, things like ThinApp and ZenApp and AppV and some of the other ones, semantics still, does anybody use the AppStream stuff? I mean, it's still around. Install free new message. There's all sorts of application virtualization solutions out there that kind of stray off the path that we always focus on. So these options are out there, but the idea here behind the application virtualization is that we get to decouple the applications from the OS. So if this is the OS down here, Windows 7, and we can put the applications in their own container, then we can take and move it to a different OS, and somewhere else, and somewhere else, and somewhere else. And that gives us all sorts of flexibility. So that alone can satisfy some of the goals of, say, facilitating OS migrations, or hardware compatibility, that sort of thing. We can isolate things, not hardware compatibility, but moves, adds, and changes. The problem is that those solutions don't always work for everything. who does that? But so you run into situations then where those different solutions, maybe ThinApp does a better job of virtualizing one application and App V does a better job of another one. And so now you're still in a complex situation where you have either one solution that doesn't work for everything or multiple solutions for all your different applications out there. So there's challenges associated with that, but the benefits of it are pretty significant. The other thing, I'm not entirely sure why that slide is there. So the other thing that we can do with applications to kind of give some users more flexibility and have it maybe not matter so much where they're logging in at is, if this is application virtualization, then this can be an app store or self-service applications. And so the users can go and just pick the application they want and load that thing on. And then we have some more flexibility too that can help satisfy those goals that people keep saying that you need VDI for, you need to go whole hog into desktop virtualization. Next is user environment management. And I decided walking here from the hotel, because it takes like an hour, that I think I want to break this up. I mean, I feel like we tried to lump user environment management and user virtualization and things like that into into the same bucket. And I feel like user virtualization and user environment management are two very different things. They kind of have the same focus, but user environment management to me builds on user virtualization by actually tweaking and managing the user's environment. Whereas user virtualization is more like, it's more like this, taking my environment and making that its own separate container. So the user's personalization, the user's environment is virtualized. And so you can take that and move that from one OS to another, whatever form factor that may be, physical or virtual. And then the user environment management part, I think, gets in there and can make tweaks and so on. So I feel like I said, I decided this without time to change slides, but I really feel like I want to call this two separate things from here on out. But that's the idea, is that we can start to compartmentalize both the applications and the user environment. And that gives us a lot of flexibility that, again, used to be touted with just VDI, but we don't need that. And we all know AppSense and RES, right? They duke it out. Got click happy there. They duke it out all the time. They're basically feature for feature. They just go at it with each other, and it's fun as hell to watch and write about. But there's all the other solutions out there too, Immediate and Sense, Triceret, Liquidware, even VUEM from Pierre Momignon, who's speaking, I think, even about that. Or he'll definitely talk to you about it if you find him. So there's a ton of solutions out there, and there's probably many more, and if you're here and I left it off, sorry. These solutions, for the most part, all work with physical desktops. And this video, I did this session, a similar one in London. I'm going to actually replace that video with this one because there, at the time, Triceret had a solution that didn't work with physical desktops. It did, but it wasn't really supported. It was meant for virtual. And since then, they've actually changed that. So now Triceret we can put into here as well. The reason Tricerets didn't work, incidentally, which I learned today, was that they require a constant connection to a database to make sure that all the profile stuff is in sync. And so it would have worked technically, but it didn't work on laptops, for instance, because once it went offline, it lost sync and all of that. So now all of those solutions on that last black and white page, they work on physical desktops too. And so if you get out of that mindset that this is all about virtual desktops, virtual, you can take these and apply them to physical as well. And this is where the user virt and user environment management come in. For a lot of people, user virt does pretty well. You know, it takes care of a lot of issues. But sometimes we need to go a bit deeper. And so that's where the user environment management the complexity increases, but the manageability also goes up with that. And that's where AppSense and RES come in, Immediate Sense, these guys. They give you things like user installed applications, secure data, privilege elevation, all sorts of features that maybe not everybody needs, but certainly can come in handy. I can't go too much longer without talking about UEV. Has anybody used Microsoft UEV yet? Are you deploying it? Just one? No? Oh. So UEV, it's interesting to me because it's double compartmentalizing for us, right? So UEV takes application-specific profile changes or user environment changes and bundles that with the application. So not only are we compartmentalizing the applications and compartmentalizing the user experience, but we're tying them together, which is quite a bit different than just saying this layer goes here and this layer goes here. So let me see the best way to explain it. It's kind of like Flex Profiles, if you remember how that worked, where you log on, it sucks in your settings from a config file, and then once your session actually launches, it has all the settings, and when you log off, it saves off those settings to the config file, and then the cycle repeats. This is similar, except it does that all the time. And so when you launch an application, it loads that application's specific configuration for that user. As you make changes to it, it saves those, and then when you save that off, it just bundles your settings with the app. And so the flexibility there is pretty cool. The problem is that it only works for data and files that are within the user's profile and within their specific registry hive. So it's not quite as flexible as any of the other solutions out there. But it's pretty cool that Microsoft has finally endorsed user environment virtualization by making a product called User Environment Virtualization. It took them a long time to do it, though. So in addition to this list, we can also have UEV on this. Next up is encrypted OS images. Did you ever see this? This is the guy who founded Boing Boing, I think, had this wedding ring made for him and his wife. And so I don't know what they do on Saturdays, but maybe they just sit around encoding messages on their wedding rings to each other or something. But it's a pretty badass wedding ring, but I don't think my wife would be cool enough to want that.
Hold on, say that into the tape recorder.
I don't think my wife would be cool enough to want that. However, my wife is really awesome. She was here yesterday. I had my son walking around. Maybe you saw that. I took him back to the demo hall there and walked around and collected all sorts of swag. And she just kept getting more and more annoyed because she's like, now we have to take all this crap home. But he loved it. So encrypted OS images, this is one that, let's face it, VDI wins this one, right? It's the easiest way to encrypt an entire OS image. It's a file, right? So we can encrypt that file relatively easily. We can, it's just automatic. So when we try to do that with disks, actual physical hard disks, it's a little bit more intrusive of a process, right? So if you go to Wikipedia, there are 51 different packages that will encrypt disks. And I don't know what half of the features are on there. I'm no black hat kind of security guy, but 51, holy smokes. The one that everybody talks about, though, is BitLocker, because that's the one that comes with Windows. Does anybody use BitLocker? That's actually more than in London. So is it like a high security sort of implementation, government or that sort of a thing? Yeah. So the quick rundown about how BitLocker works, because I spent a fair amount of time. I always knew it was there, but I never really knew how it worked. So I figured I would do some of the legwork. The quick rundown is that it's been here since Vista. But it's also there in Windows 7 and will be in Windows 8. It's in the Ultimate and Enterprise versions, and I forget what the versions of Windows 8 are, but I would imagine it's in at least the upper one. The idea, though, is that basically there's a small unencrypted area that contains the boot files, and then a larger encrypted area that holds all of the OS and everything else. And the way what manages all of that is the TPM, the Trusted Platform Module. And this thing, it's a chip. It's a piece of hardware built in that does two things. One, it actually maintains the encryption on that encrypted area of the disk and ties it to the hardware, so that disk can't come out and go elsewhere. And if I'm speaking wrong, go ahead and correct me. But it also maintains and makes sure that unencrypted boot space is untouched by saving off by checking a signature every time that thing boots to make sure that things haven't changed, because that's where you could actually get in and take advantage of the machine. So along with the TPM module, there's other things that enhance the security of that. There's a PIN that you can enter, just like going to the ATM, your machine boots up, you enter a PIN, and that allows you to boot. And there's also a USB dongle that you can do, which seems, I don't know, I guess having it is an added layer of security, but just having a USB stick that somebody could just swipe and plug into your computer and boot it up seems kind of weird to me. So, but what you can do is use all of these things with each other. So TPM you can just run all by yourself. If you just want to have the disk encrypted and keep it so that somebody can't swipe the drive out and go away, you can do that. You can add the USB stick functionality, you can add the pin functionality, and combine all three of those to make it uber secure, I guess. The problem is this is pretty hard. I mean, this is a destructive process. You have to actually touch the machine. Is there an automatic way to deploy this? I mean, I didn't think so. Okay. Okay, so yeah. I mean, but the idea here is that you actually have to replace the OS that's on that device. So it's a destructive install. You have to get the OS off, load it, and then set up BitLocker, and then load this thing back on. And on top of that, that means you have to just touch every single machine. It's not, there's no automated process, there's no script, you just have to do this. And so VDI, compared to BitLocker, as far as encrypting the OS image, hands down, VDI wins that. Unless you add in something like a client hypervisor. And the client hypervisors have come, so far in the past 5 years, or since whenever they started talking. It had to have been 2007 or 8. So client hypervisors have come far enough that this is actually a really usable solution. You have a virtual OS instance, but it's running on that box, so all the compute is still happening locally. And since it's a virtualized OS that's sitting on a file, you can encrypt that. And so you get that super easy encryption that comes with VDI, but you can execute that stuff locally and not have to roll out the complex VDI solution. I don't know. I mean, BitLocker to me, disk encryption in general to me seems like a point solution. Maybe if it was a government agency that needed everything, if it was high security, that kind of a thing, but maybe you just need to encrypt a few drives, that kind of a thing, then this kind of one-off solution seems like a good idea. Files anywhere. This one's blowing up, right, as they would say. It's a consumerization topic for sure, right? We're talking about dealing with Dropbox and users putting files out there and all these other different one-off ones like SkyDrive and things like that. Files Anywhere is something, though, that is touted as a VDI feature, or at least was at one point. Now, who wants to connect, like Brian with those phones in his keynote yesterday where he's like, oh, look, we can put apps on the phone. Bing, here's some Windows on your phone. This was touted as a VDI feature, that you can connect to your VDI desktop and access your files from anywhere. And while that's true, who the hell wants to do that? And as a user, if I see that, I'm going to go, yeah, right, I'm just going to put Dropbox on and sync stuff that way, and that way I can get it from anywhere for real. Because of that, companies are starting to come out with business-oriented solutions, right? AppSense has 2 of them with Data Now and Data Locker. I might have this backwards, but Data Locker, I believe, is the AppSense Labs solution that encrypts files or encrypts things at the file level as you put them into Dropbox so that encrypted files can live in unencrypted kind of public cloud space. So it's a different approach. It's not an officially sanctioned enterprise approach, but Data Now is an actual enterprise solution from AppSense for that. RES has Hyperdrive, Citrix has ShareFile, VMware has Octopus, and then Dropbox and Box both have their own enterprise data solutions as well. So companies are reacting to this in a way that makes it better even to get access to files anywhere than it was to use VDI. Now, obviously, you still can in combination with some of these things, but you don't need VDI to get files anywhere, regardless of what anybody tells you. The thing is that these solutions here, they've got to be perfect, just dead on perfect. Otherwise, we've got IT hater that will just go use Dropbox on her own anyway. And so that's a bigger issue, the consumerization of IT and the security associated with that. But the idea here is that if you're going to do files anywhere, you got to do it right. And doing it with VDI is actually not the way to do it because that's just going to piss them off. So doing it with one of those other ways, if you can make it a really great experience, that's the way to go. Otherwise, it's just going to remain a liability. That was supposed to go along with that. I'm hungry too. So next is remote Windows applications. This one is here as a formality because who doesn't know how to, about remote desktop services, right? So if we have to get applications to a device, we don't need VDI, we can use RDS to do that. What's interesting though is that we can also take this another step further. Because right now, how many are held up on Windows XP based on the applications that won't run on Windows 7? All right, there's a few. And is there an end in sight for that, or are you going to have to run Windows XP for a while? I mean, right, not sure. So we all know that Windows XP is going to go away. We know that Windows XP's expiration date is April 8th, 2014. And so, there it is. So we have this deadline that's there, but with no end in sight to the actual problem. So now we're up against it. And I realize it's less than 2 years away, but that's not that far. So how do we get those users upgraded to Windows 7 so that we're still not managing Windows XP? Hell, even now, who wants to manage it now? We need to find out another way, and we can use terminal services to do that. Windows Server 2003 R2's expiration date, or end of life, is July 14th. I think July 15th, actually, 2015. So you've got an extra 15 months of Windows Server. So you could, in theory, take those applications that work only on Windows XP and move them to Windows Server, and then you can upgrade your users to Windows 7. Even if that Windows Server is a one-to-one instance because it doesn't work with terminal services for some reason, you can still just give them access to one Windows Server 2003 instance. It probably is worth it for the $500 license to get them off of Windows XP. So you can use terminal services on a Windows XP, basically it's Windows XP server, right? To get you over that hump and help you better manage those desktops, which is really what all this is about anyway. So RDS is boring, and we know that, but that's kind of a unique approach to using it to help you get off of Windows XP on the desktop. Next up is bare metal provisioning. We've been doing this for years, right? We've got Ghost and Acronis and Altiris and all of these things. Technically, we've been bare metal provisioning since laplink cables. I found one of those recently. I saw a yellow cable buried in a pile and said, I know what that is. It was a parallel one. So now the new way of thinking this bare metal provisioning here is actually deploying the OSs to absolutely nothing, kind of automatically, right? And we can do that in really great ways with application or with OS streaming, right? Because the more automated we can make this process and the less impact we can have and the less time it takes to do that, the better. The better we can manage those desktops. And so streaming the OS, much like applications where we just stream the bits needed to boot and then flip it around so the users can use it while the other bits that are needed come in on the back end, is great. There used to be products out there that did that. Citrix Provisioning Services now is still there, but only works with Zen Desktop. DoubleTake Flex, somebody bought DoubleTake, can't remember who, but as soon as they did, Flex went away. And Dell actually OEM'd DoubleTake Flex, and with all of that change, it all went away. So now we had 3 solutions, now we have none, except there's something from Wise called WSM, which I think stands for Workstation Manager, but I might be making that up, so let's just go with WSM. And I guess that's now Dell WSM, or Dell Wise WSM. They just keep adding words. This does exactly that. You put your image on a box, cheap storage, doesn't have to be anything crazy, and then machine boots up, talks Pixie, downloads the bits that are needed to, and boots up the OS image. And so this kind of thing allows you to migrate operating systems. If you have something installed locally and then all of a sudden one day there's a TFTP server and a flag that allows that machine to boot up, get down its new downloader bits and download its new OS from Wise WSM, you can actually facilitate an OS migration with a solution like that. So it's really powerful. I'm surprised that there was only that one out there. The Winova solution actually is similar to that. I mentioned them earlier, and I'll get to them later as well, but much more robust. So, but as far as just streaming disk images down, Dell WSM is the only way to do that I'm aware of for physical desktops now. But at least there's a way. Next is single OS images, which a lot of this we can base on our bare metal provisioning stuff. The same things we talked about with the OS streaming and the Acronis and the Altiris and things like that, we can do with, or we can use for this as well. Or we can use client hypervisors. Because in this situation, let's back up. One way to do the single OS image is to do something called driver loading, which every time I ask this, people look at me like I'm insane. I promise that I don't do this, but I've seen other people take a box, load OS, load Windows on it, add the drivers, image that, drop it on another piece of hardware, load the drivers on it, image it, do it on another piece, and that way they have one giant image. Wow, that's bright. They have one giant image that has all their drivers on it, and it's a train wreck by the time you actually get this gold master image, because while it may work on everything, there's 15 services with X's down in the system tray because none of the drivers work, none of the services work. But I've seen organizations do that. We call it driver loading. And it was the bane of my existence the last time I was an SE at an in-house job. So there's that way to do it, but that way sucks. Client hypervisors, though, on the other hand, they have come a long way. And they're no longer about offline VDI. When they came out, this is what we all thought. Oh my God, offline VDI, it's going to be so awesome. And then both we and the client hypervisor manufacturers realized that it's hard, and it's really complex. And who the hell wants to ship VMs across the wire constantly, back and forth, check in and check out? And so we realized it's not practical too. And so right now, you're like, why are you talking about this? Like, you should check out client hypervisors. So the reason is that things have changed so much, but it's been such a long road because it's been so hard. We've had to worry about things like USB devices, graphics cards, wireless cards, all of these different things that had to be supported. Servers are pretty easy to virtualize, right? It's the same permutations of hardware across the board for the most part. There's some tweaks and changes and things like that, but there's 10 times as many of these combinations as you can make, and that's what this is supposed to illustrate. When you type in lots of permutations into Google image search, you get this chess thing. The idea, though, is that we had to do all of this, support all of this, and we had to do it and make it user-friendly. And that's the hardest part, and that's why, to this day, if you go get Zen Client and look at it, you still got these Linuxy-looking host UI, and they have an app in order to connect to wireless. They've actually just recently changed it so that it looks at least like it's a Windows app, even though it's a Linux app. That's actually modifying the wireless settings of the host wireless card because the guest can't see that. So all of this stuff had to be user-friendly to the point to get us to where we could use this as a viable technology for single image management. And then there was the Type 2 hypervisors, which is the easy button of client hypervisors. The host OS does all the heavy lifting because it just emulates all the virtual hardware. And the host OS takes care of all the connections to the hardware in general. So this is pretty easy, and the emulation over time has definitely gotten better to the point where now we have 3D support and we've got really good performance, and we're to the point now where we can take advantage of some local hardware features like 3D remoting with VMware Fusion, for instance, that I have on my laptop, or 3D remoting, 3D graphics emulation. So we can do a lot more things with Type 2 hypervisors than we could before. And so when we step back and reevaluate it, we see that client hypervisors, Type 1 especially, they have direct hardware access, they offer security, they offer us the ability to whitewash our hardware, which is how we get to the single image management. Because now we have the hypervisor that handles all the differences, and now we have one clean slate that we can deploy those operating systems to. So now we get that security from the disk encryption, plus we get the ability to deploy one single image to all of those different pieces of hardware. The problem, destructive install, and it's a weird host UI. That host UI is getting better, but still. And the destructive install, kind of like BitLocker, there's just no way to rip and replace, or to not rip and replace to get this thing on there. You can P2V your old operating system off of that box and then V2V it back on, but no matter what, you have to touch it, and it's a complicated process. Type 2, on the other hand, is device and host ignorant for the most part. You can think of an OS, there's probably some sort of hypervisor that runs on it. Normal host UI, assuming it's the user, the box that the user normally uses, they're familiar with it, they kind of get how it works as good as they can. And the install isn't destructive, so just works. The problem is that all the hardware is emulated, and the unmanaged hosts can be insecure. Now really, unmanaged anything is insecure, so 601, I guess. But the host can be compromised, and it doesn't matter then if your VM is managed or not. All of this, though, has nothing to do with the offline VDI or anything like that. It's all about desktop management. And Type 1 hypervisors are actually a little bit about device management as well. So client hypervisors now today are about single image disk management. They're about us just finding a better way to manage our desktops, almost completely unrelated to VDI. It's just that it's still using virtualization, it's still using desktops. It's definitely a part of desktop virtualization, just not VDI. Remote management, this one, this is here for completeness and is the only slide for remote management. Obviously, we can do this. If you have TS, if you have VDI, you have cloud services like go to my PC and log me in and go to Assist and Windows Intune. Does anybody use Intune, by the way? Just 2? I showed that, or 3. I showed that to the CIO of a company I used to work for, and I emailed it to him, and he emailed me back with, I just threw up in my mouth a little. Because he was so appalled at that. Now, that was a couple of years ago, so maybe he's warmed up to this management from the cloud, but it's interesting. At least some people are using it. So, do you like it?
Oh, yeah, testing it.
Testing it? Okay.
I got 2 people in China that are trying it.
Okay. Somebody else said, oh, yeah?
Yeah, remote user management in like less than ideal conditions, like people out in, I guess, on an oil rig, for example.
Oh, okay, so in less than ideal conditions. So I guess in that situation, you would make the change in Intune, and then Intune, the service, just keeps trying to make that change until the connection is good enough to do it?
Yeah, we find that it's a little bit better than trying to get SCCM out to those users.
Same situation.
Okay. Yeah, so bad connections, that makes a lot of sense. And yeah, there's not a whole lot else that can do that. I mean, you know, Citrix has some things, but I think Intune's probably the way to go, what with it being from Microsoft and all. At this point. They've been working on it for a couple of years now. And then there's also the stuff you have in-house, like PC Anywhere and Track It and Dameware and countless other things that you just go to. If one doesn't work, you just keep trying to force your way in with another one. So remote management, it is what it is. We can do that, no problem. And if somebody comes and tells you that you can do remote management with VDI, you just say, yeah, we can do that now too, man. Updates are another one of those that are like, I don't know. So we talk about updates, or we hear about how updating and patch management is a feature of VDI. And while that, I guess, could be true, especially in the context of single image or what do I say, non-persistent VDI, I'm not entirely sure if VDI patch management exists when you have one-to-one VDI. Because to me, if these things are persistent, you've got to just treat them like regular desktops. And if you don't, the way I kind of rationalize that is last year, VMware bought Shavlik. And I don't actually know how that's affected people. When I was last an admin, I still managed the brianmadden.com servers before we moved to TechTarget. I used HFNetCheck for all of our patching and all of that. Is that still available for use outside of vCenter? I don't know if it is or not. But VMware acquiring a solution for patching, I think, shows that there's still some ways to go with virtualization and patch management. The idea, so they put it into vCenter, and to me, servers, obviously, I mean, this is for patching servers. To me, servers are one-to-one, and they're not a whole lot different than one-to-one VMs for desktops. And so my impression is that since you have to patch these things anyway, since you have to patch your desktops, your one-to-one desktops anyway, the solution you already have for patch management, whatever that may be, is probably better than the one that you can get by using VDI. Now, there's some things that you can do. There's some fancy things that you can do to make that a little bit more efficient on the back end. But by and large, patch management is only, I think, a feature of non-persistent shared image VDI. So if you're not doing that, then patch management really isn't, it's kind of a non-starter. So the last few, or the last section here is about who's doing this. We talked about these guys, Liquidware and Sense and Immediate and all of them earlier on. They're the guys that are doing the user environment management, user virtualization. But then there's other companies like that are really close to home to us that actually have the solutions that we need to do this without VDI. Citrix is one of them. VMware, Mocha 5, and even Microsoft, believe it or not. This list actually used to be longer because Virtual Computer was on there and Winova was on there. And then VMware and Citrix decided that they wanted to make my slide less cluttered. And so they just started acquiring people. So now we have a nice clean right-hand side, Microsoft we'll start with just because that was the most quizzical one when I looked at that. They're on the list because they have AppV and UEV, right? They have solutions that can help us compartmentalize the applications and the settings and the personalization and things like that. And I think that based on the licensing situation, that it's safe to say that Microsoft is 100% committed to making it as difficult as possible to do anything other than physical desktops. So I think that Microsoft is fully behind doing it without VDI. Although they've made enough changes, and there's some other sessions about that, about how RDS has changed with Server 2012. But man, even that licensing is confusing. Citrix, on the other hand, this is going to sound like a Citrix and a VMware commercial as these things come up. But Citrix has XenApp. So XenApp streaming, that's your application virtualization. XenApp itself is your remote Windows application solution, and you can do just XenApp. Even if you buy Zen Desktop, you don't actually have to do the VDI part. The Citrix receiver and storefront thing, this is actually turning into a fully fledged application platform of its own, right? This allows you to have that App Store functionality. This going forward with all the device integration things, the mobile devices and things like that, you can actually deploy native applications for mobile devices into this thing. I mean, receiver itself, it's no longer just the client that gets you to your Windows desktop. Virtual Computer now, with that acquisition, they've got the client hypervisor that gives them single image management and encrypted disks. They had that before with Zen Client, but now Virtual Computer gives them the management capabilities that they need to manage devices and to manage the OS inside of them. They've got ShareFile for Files Anywhere, which is what, in the last 12 months or so, they've acquired that, and they're really getting behind the whole follow me data thing that everybody seems to be getting on at the moment. And they have GoToAssist for remote management. So as far as a company that has a lot of the pieces of doing VDI without VDI, Citrix is, they're well positioned. Because you can do all of these things without actually going to get Zen Desktop and deploying all the complex infrastructure and dealing with all of those things that you have to learn. VMware, also on the list. ThinApp for application virtualization. AppBlast for remote Windows apps. We don't know a whole lot about it yet. I mean, we've seen the demos from VMworld and that, so hopefully at VMworld this year, we'll get to see AppBlast in all its newfound glory. And maybe then we can start to think about how to strategically use that. VMware Horizon for App Store and self-service applications. I think Horizon is just amazing. And if I did more than write articles in TextEdit, and I would probably want to use that, but my life is spent in Evernote and TextEdit, so, and Chrome. But I think Horizon for organizations is just a phenomenal solution as you get into the cloud and trying to deploy applications that way as well, and all the identity federation, and I'm excited about it. Winova, of course, we're going to talk about this later, but they offer the single image management, user environment management, bare metal provisioning. So Winova, for me, like I said earlier, is kind of what got me thinking about this session in general. So I'll have fun there. And then we have Octopus for Files Anywhere, which was just released, and so this is their corporate Dropbox Files Anywhere solution. All of this, VMware View's not even on there. You can do all this stuff without it. So we're waiting, though, for some things. What's that? Oh, I thought somebody said something. So we're waiting for some of these things like AppBlast. We're waiting to see how Winova shakes out. We're waiting to see how all the virtual computer stuff actually gets integrated into the Citrix platform. So, we kind of have a sit back and wait approach. And while one company might have a whole bunch of solutions that you want, you may be sitting back and waiting for VMware or something to get AppBlast out to see what that's going to be like. And it's kind of like, did you guys see the earnings report? I think it was for Apple said they sold like 17 million less iPhones this past quarter, and they think they can attribute that to the fact that people are just too hell-bent on waiting for the iPhone 5. So like literally the anticipation has depressed sales. And in this case, that could also be happening here. The anticipation of waiting to find out what's going on with all of these different features is preventing us from committing to one or the other. And really, you can mix and match those pieces too. If, for instance, if ThinApp did a better job of streaming your applications and then you wanted to use XenApp to do remote desktop, remote Windows apps, you can do that. So the Citrix and Virtual Computer, VMware, Winova, we're waiting to see how those things shake out. And then Mocha 5's in there too on that list. Mocha 5, client hypervisor and layering is what they're known for. And Mocha 5, really, it's the only standalone client hypervisor now out there after Citrix acquired Virtual Computer. So Mocha 5 solution, what drives the client hypervisor, I believe, is their layering technology. Because their layering technology it relies on virtualization. It relies on having VHD files or VMDK files that one contains the operating system, one contains the applications, one contains the user data. And so that was virtualization client hypervisors was their way of implementing layering. And since then, they've grown the client hypervisors to be a standalone product all by itself as well. So the 10-cent layering tour, just for the hell of it, is take your hardware, operating system, applications, and user data, and layer those all together. But the problem is that Windows is in no way meant to work like that. So instead we have this monolithic block, and that thing sucks to move around. So what we want to do is take our hardware, take our operating system, our applications, and our user data, and we want to swap out the applications and the hardware. And then we can put in new hardware and new applications. And that gives us all sorts of flexibility when we can start compartmentalizing that way. And this is leading into the whole Winova discussion, because they're also layering, but with physical. But to us, we're like, yeah, this is awesome. But again, Microsoft isn't really trying to make that happen. So we still are stuck with this monolithic block. So the way the companies have done that, Unidesk, Mocha 5, Ringcube, but now part of Citrix, is by using virtual disks. So virtual hard drives that can be layered on top of each other, merged together at runtime, and then separated out when it's all done with all the proper changes going to the right place, and then reassembled again at boot and taken apart when it's shut down. That's where Winova comes in. The VHD solution is awesome, right? But Winova does this on physical machines, no virtualization. And so I was super excited when I heard VMware bought them, because now I'm thinking, wow, if we combine Winova and layering with all the stuff that VMware can do, the Horizon, the View, the virtualization in general, the Atlas, the Octopus, all of that, holy cow, look at how comprehensive that solution is. But even Winova standalone, once I heard from them prior to the acquisition, I wondered why nobody had acquired them yet. And then, sure enough, VMware goes and saves the day. So I believe that the Winova solution is the most complete single solution that offers all of the stuff that allows us to do VDI without actually doing VDI. It gives us single OS images. They actually have one OS image and then a driver library. So when a box boots up and communicates with the Winova server, it says, okay, here's the image that we give to everybody, or your group of computers. And then, oh, I see you're this computer, so I'm going to shoot in these drivers that I know go with your hardware, and then sends that off. And it merges them together at the point where it sends them to the device. And it does this across the board. And it doesn't matter what box you log into tomorrow. It just does that again. So you can actually take that to the next level and think of using it with virtualization, with VDI, if you wanted to get there. Because now you can take that same OS image and deploy that to VDI as well, because you can just have it shoot in the appropriate drivers to make it run on whatever data center hypervisor that you've got. We've also got patch management, because now we've got this, we do have this single image for everybody, and so we can make sure that that single image is updated constantly. And then just deploy that out to the users the next time they boot. Which, again, with single images, patch management is really easy. Then we have bare metal provisioning as well, because obviously we're talking about streaming down these OS images to everybody. And I guess that's important too, is it's streaming. It's actually streaming down the bits as needed to get the thing to boot up. So we're not waiting for a VM to copy from one place to the other. We're taking the bits that we need and working with them on the fly. Plus, this is what actually got me thinking about the difference between user environment management and user virtualization. I don't believe personally that it has a user environment management solution built in. It does, however, have a user virtualization solution built in. So user virtualization in Winova land is that all of my users' changes that are not in the base image can be saved off as a delta, saved off elsewhere, and then recompiled onto that base image later on. So in my mind, that's user virtualization because we're just compartmentalizing the user's environment. We still need to go back and do the actual tweaking with something else if you need to do that. And it has the ability to roll back updates, much like a client hypervisor would have. If you make a change to that, if a user makes a change and that gets committed, but that screws something up, you as the admin can roll that user back. If you have a patch, you can roll that patch back, much like a client hypervisor would have. And like I said before, all this works on all these physical machines too. So different hardware, physical hardware, same image, no virtualization necessary. And like I said before, if you can actually use this to deploy that same image to physical and virtual footprints. Now, yeah?
How about bandwidth?
I don't know what the bandwidth would be. I know that since it's a disk streaming, it's something that we've been doing, but I couldn't tell you, all the other solutions out there worked fine on typical 100 meg connections around the data center, around in a local office, but I don't know what we're talking about for WAN constraints and branch offices and that kind of a thing. I also don't know infrastructure-wise if there's a branch solution that can replicate and host mirrors of those single images. I would imagine there can be. David, I'll look at you. Do you know?
So for the branch office, the branch reflector is the technology that actually allows peer-to-peer distribution of the blocks. So the single instance store that everything's stored in is highly deduped. And remember, like the name Winova, these are the X-WAN acceleration team guys from Cisco. So they really know how to compress the living daylights out of what gets under the wire. But once that one block is sent over the wire, the branch reflector distributes the common blocks to all the peers. So once you send out an image, it only needs to come down once in highly compressed form to cover all the users in the remote image.
Is it cached on the branch reflector for future use, or is that kind of in? I guess it has to be, right? If it's
cached in the sense that it's the user's disk blocks that they're using every single day.
yeah, okay,
So
gotcha. Okay.
But what if they're not in the branch?
What if you mean? Oh, what if they're out remote, just out in the field somewhere?
then it's back to the central server.
So David actually has known these guys for a long time, so that's why I may look at you a few more times if you don't mind. So I'm glad you're here. What I think, because VDI is still very real and still out there, I picture a situation where the broker is now somehow aware of where you're trying to connect from and can decide which desktop is the most appropriate for you. So say it can tell that I'm coming in from this badass workstation under my desk, and the broker can then decide, hey, you're gonna have a better experience if I deploy your image directly to your local computer and have everything execute locally. Or that same user goes home, the broker can decide, hey, you're at home, let's skip that. Let's just deploy this to VDI and let you use it that way. And so in that situation, that doesn't exist right now. In my mind, I would love to see that just from a flexibility standpoint. It's certainly not insurmountable. This can be done kind of manually today, but it would be cool if there was that level of intelligence in the broker someday. So, and like I said before about the user environment virtualization, like I said, the Winova layering solution is, I believe, virtualization, just compartmentalizing the user's personality from the single image, as well as they can do the applications. If you actually need to tweak the user's experience and manage that in a more, ironclad kind of a way, then you need to get some of these other solutions that actually focus on tweaking settings and managing the actual user environment. The last thing here is I wanted to go back and look at those goals again, because I can pick a couple of them and give some examples of how we can use these technologies that we've talked about to satisfy those goals. And the first one's the hardware agnostic. And in order to make our desktop management solution hardware agnostic, we can use things like client hypervisors, like Winova, and like our driver-loaded our driver-loaded image if we wanted to. That actually should be a separate line, the WISE WSM. I'm not sure what happened there. So WISE WSM is also on that list because we can sort of get to some hardware agnostic with some creative drivers and that kind of a thing. But we can use this kind of technology to at least reduce the number of actual OS images that we're managing and have to maintain with patches and things like that. Another one is the support OS migrations. And this one's interesting. User environment management and user virtualization together can support the user or the OS migration, because if we're talking about migrating from Windows 7 or Windows XP to Windows 7, we can compartmentalize the applications, and compartmentalize, the data, the personality, and store that off. And then we can actually use WISE WSM to automatically replace and stream down the new operating system. And then we can take our user data or personality and put that right back on top of the new operating system. So with these two technologies, we can just replace Windows XP with an image without actually touching the device. That compartmentalization, the flexibility that affords you is pretty powerful. And application virtualization should be on this as well, because we can compartmentalize the applications and move those around. In fact, hell, we could add remote Windows apps to this using XenApp or Terminal Server, because of those things, if you virtualize those things, you can move those around. Much like I was talking about with the Windows Server 2003, using that to get your XP apps off of the desktop so you can upgrade it. Oh, yeah, it is there. What do you know? So takeaways from this. The first one is that if you're hesitating on VDI, who actually has a scaled VDI implementation? Wow, kinda scale. So not many. And so that's, I assume, why you're here. And clearly you're not alone. So there's all sorts of ways to get these goals with these other features, with these other products, I mean. So not alone, you can talk to each other, find the problems. You can talk to me, reach out. We can talk about all sorts of stuff, spitball how different ways to use this, because it does take some creativity. With the VDI stuff, it's kind of spoon-fed to you. Here's all these features. There's a giant bucket full of features. Use what you want. By the way, you have to figure out how to make them all complex, work with each other. And this is more creative, abstract thinking to try to figure out which tool to use for this and which for that. And it may not be, if you're doing more than 2 or 3 or 4 of those goals, maybe you do need to get some more broad solution. Hell, just from a cost perspective, to license 3 or 4 unique tools, it might just cost less to go all out and do VDI at some point. But if you're just trying to do 1 or 2 or 3 of these things, satisfy 1 or 2 or 3 of these goals, you're not alone, and there's definitely ways to do that. Second takeaway is those goals. So use these as the guide, right? This is a relatively complete list. I'm sure there's more. I'm sure there's kind of subsets of this that you can add as well. But use this as the guide. I want to do hot desking. I want to do branch office support. I want to do faster OS migrations. Those should be your guides for what desktop virtualization technology you use. Not because VDI is cool or because we've always done terminal server. Let those goals be the guide to help you pick which technology to use. And the third one is that you don't necessarily have to stray from the companies that we all know, because they also offer something that we can leverage. And like I showed on that list, I mean, it's impressive how much Citrix and VMware have without ever touching VDI. And with that, let's do questions. Yeah?
In your opinion, do you think that VMware is going to make Winova a VDI-only solution based on licensing restraints or re-architecture, right?
All right, well, that shows that we can hear in the back.
Are they going to strip it down, or are they going to restrict it by licensing? Like, I got to buy a new license to use Winova. Like,
I hope, like the person in the back, that they leave it alone. However, hang on. I don't hope that it remains standalone. I hope that it's also available standalone, but that they incorporate that and really meld it well with all of the desktop virtualization solutions, not just VDI or not just View, but with Horizon and AppBlast. I think that they can really do a lot, is just making that one more thing that VMware can do to help you manage desktops. Because this is something This is unique for VMware. Managing desktops has been off of the radar for them for so long. And it's interesting to me that both Citrix and VMware, within 8 days of each other, both acquired something that actually helps them manage physical devices, when both companies were completely about desktops and applications in the data center before that.
I think it's the future of Composer. Composer goes away, and then Lenovo comes in.
Okay.
Composer, but
That's,
I don't know what they're going to do with it other than, replacing Composer with it.
yeah. I feel like, and I'm not going to put David on the spot unless he starts talking, but I feel like that's something at VMworld that we'll start to kind of get an idea for the direction of.